What's happening, everybody? Welcome back yet to a brand new video. This is your guide and mentor, Ali Tarafta. Today, we're going to talk about the credit framework and the architecture of what you need to do in order to get the most amount of funding and to be as effective as possible when maintaining a positive credit score. This method right here is one of the most important methods that you need to stay in tune with, specifically if you're trying to obtain higher scores, get optimal funding, and trying to maintain solid credit scores. And for that particular reason, I've created 5 parts to this video to give you some clarity as the others before this, to give you the complete picture of what a credit framework and architecture should look like, given the specific changes that are happening with the new FICO 10 and the FICO 10T, which is trended data. And you need to be extremely cautious about this. So with that said, let's get started on today's video. So the credit score architect model, the idea behind that is to understand the infrastructure that's composed of your credit score. But where do we weigh in the strategies on what to focus on? What are some of the things we need to be on the lookout for to probably and most possibly get the optimal amount of funding? But at the same time, what allows us to borrow as much as possible for the specific needs on a credit-related transaction based on these methods and the leveraging of these methods and the way you use them? The idea here is very simple, but let's start with our first and very important point. The first point is about personal algorithm, the personal identifier algorithm more specifically. The reason why this is important is because in one of my videos, I talked to you guys about how to get rid of your personal identifiers. What are some of the methods and mechanisms in order to leverage that information to clean up your personal identifiers? Now, why would one want to clean up their personal identifiers before all the negative items? Well, the simple magic and trick to that is your personal identifiers demonstrate a keen level of confidence in creditors that you're very consistent with your address, that you're not hopping from one place to another, and there's congruence there. But more than anything else, there's a lot of people who have mismatched data on their personal identifiers. And for example, if you have a name that's very popular within a specific radius and the addresses are mismatched, and for some reason the credit bureaus have, collected data about you with information that's potentially inaccurate, well, the idea here is if they mismatch that information and you go for funding, you actually might get denied, believe it or not. So having a specific personal identifier algorithm, which is congruent and consistent across all 3 credit bureaus, is one of the most important things that I believe you should focus on. So for that reason, I'm going to strongly encourage you guys to clean up your personal identifiers, have the first and last name only congruent across all 3, the same exact information, one specific address if possible, that demonstrates you've been in that address for some time now, right? And then keep that congruent across all 3 as well. This specific algorithm is the starting point of underwriting in a systematic underwriting process. As long as that is congruent and it's straightforward and there's literally no confusion there or mismatched data or let alone inaccuracies that are preventing you from actually getting optimal funding, then you're good to go. So with that said, I'd strongly encourage you guys to review this process once again. But with that, let's move on to the next point. Our next point is the debt to credit factoring, not ratio, factoring. The reason why this is important is because on an algorithm perspective, especially with the trended data, there is a possibility that the creditors moving forward in underwriting systematic process review your payment history. And if they do, and probably they will, they're also calculating the minimum payments on all those creditors based on the minimum payment amount. With a calculation of that perspective, they also calculate how much you paid towards that, if you paid more than the average or if you missed a few. That is going to determine exactly the underwriting process moving forward. So, the debt to credit factoring measures how much debt and liability you're carrying overall, how much credit was given to you throughout that 24-month history, specifically if you use strategies to increase those credit limits based on no hard inquiries, and your demonstrated payments based on the 24 months of history. If anything is incongruent there is lack of confidence in your financial history, it's showing that you haven't gotten the optimal funding that you're supposed to get, and there's anything lacking of financial confidence in that nature that creditors can simply review that data, then the possibility of getting funding or high limits of funding is minimal, right? You're not going to get optimal funding in that capacity. So I am going to encourage you guys to explore that and try to leverage and tactically use processes of paying more than what you need to, especially when it comes to minimum payments, increase that score strategically, get the limit bumps as you need to based on no hard inquiries with demonstrated financial confidence, which we're going to talk about very shortly. But that's the debt to credit factoring ratio. You need to understand that, because now we're talking about the trended data. You got to stick to that process. This is the future of credit enhancement and keeping solid credit scores. So with that said, let's move on to our third point. Our third point is credit diversity and facility, right? What does that mean? So as long as you're getting credit, you want to try to get credit that is diverse. You want to try to get installment loans, revolving credit, and so on and so forth. This is very critical. Now, there is a chance that you don't qualify for those type of funding or these type of diverse credit profiles simply because you don't meet the minimum FICO or credit requirements. What do you do in those instances? Well, I encourage you guys this is where the liquidity analysis comes in. Based on the previous video, as I discussed with you guys, you have to try and save a sum that you can at least use to demonstrate your credit diversity, and that methodology to leverage that credit diversity to get into other funding sources and capacity. To do that, you need to save a certain predetermined amount, whether it's $500 to $1,000, go to an institution, instead of revolving, switch it around and get an installment. From that perspective, go into a furniture company and do the same. The objective here is create diversity without any hard inquiries. Do this a couple of times a year in order to maintain a solid credit health. This is very crucial because this is always going to help you in underwriting facilities down the road. If you're looking for systematic underwriting to optimal funding, credit diversity is one of those methods and mechanisms that you absolutely need to rely on to get the best results possible out there. So with that said, let's move on to our next point. So our next point is the past payment performance, or historical context of payment based on a 24-month period. During that 24-month, was there any specific times that you missed a payment? Were there any specific times that you borrowed aggressively, but also as aggressively paid your credit cards or balances down? During that time, have creditors given you limit increases without you asking for it because you've demonstrated your financial capacity? So past payment for performance is one of those tools and unique structures that we really got to look at. But the overall benefit of the past payment performance far exceeds just understanding the algorithm. You have to keep in mind, 35% of your FICO score and credit score, as always, is going to be your payment history. Now, in the last 24 months, given the FICO 10T and the trend in data, you can enhance that tenfold with a very solid payment history. And if you don't have, then it's the time to build. This is because once you start to leverage this and you're getting those automatic bumps, you're also affecting directly and triggering a higher limit, which is your utilization ratio, which that also comprises of 30% of your FICO score. So right now you're sitting at 65% based on enhanced strategies. Once you do that, you have the majority of your FICO covered. And in most instances, you're going to start to see limit increases over time, your scores going higher and higher to an optimal level. And of course, ultimately, when it comes to underwriting, you're going to qualify for a lot more funding because you've demonstrated that financial confidence very clearly. So that's one of the most important things to keep in mind. It's the payment past performance, specifically the 24 months of past performance. Where have you borrowed and have paid as aggressively? Are you paying more than the minimum payment threshold? How long is it taking you to pay down some of your balances that you borrowed? That ratio is very critical. And also, are you getting limit increases along the way without asking for it? That's very, very critical because that is going to be our fifth and final point, which is demonstrated creditor confidence. So demonstrated creditor confidence is essentially showing the 24 months of payment history, but also during those times, how many times are limits being increased and how frequently and by how much is a threshold. This unique mechanism helps the future underwriting systems determine what kind of funding you can potentially be eligible for. That is the final piece to the puzzle. As long as you've demonstrated keen levels of keen levels of high growth in your credit facilities, being able to borrow as much as possible and paying it down as aggressively, having confidence from creditors' perspective to give you those huge limit increases, that all ties it together. From that perspective, now what you're sitting on is a goldmine of a FICO strategy that you can now go out and get the funding that you're looking for without specific issues. Now, we did not touch on removing the negative items because that is something that you have to do based on a strategy that you have to follow. There's videos out there in this specific channel that gives you the ethical way of doing it without getting yourself in trouble, by the way. But you have to follow those mechanisms to start with the negative. But don't just ignore what you have here as a strategy for your credit architecture and the framework. Leverage the information you just obtained today to get the optimal funding, but also work on the side while you're removing your negatives to enhance your score, because you can counterbalance the stuff that is not happening while you're still waiting for that to happen by doing things that are progressive to your personal credit score while working those credit muscles very strategically and tactically at the same time. So I hope this gives you some idea of what credit architecture framework is, what you should be looking out for, what you need to concentrate on as you move forward into the FICO models moving into the future, specifically for underwriting systems. And if you did enjoy this video, I'm going to greatly appreciate it if you can smash that thumbs up button for me. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to this channel. If you're expecting value, then this is the place to be when it comes to personal credit, financial transformation in its entirety, and establishing wealth for the long term. And with that said, I hope you guys enjoy once again. This is definitely your guide and mentor, always after. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Bye for now.